Was John Paul the First, not John Paul II, but John Paul the First, was he murdered by Vatican officials? He was the September Pope of 1978. He ruled for only 33 days, and there are a number of conspiracies surrounding the final days of his life, especially as it regards the Vatican Bank. And some people also think that he is the Bishop of White that was prophesied in the third secret of Fatima. That's not something that I hold or Tim holds, but we're here today to talk about John Paul I and this conspiracy surrounding whether he was murdered or whether he died of natural causes. So first off, Tim, is this a conspiracy theory? Is it a conspiracy? What are we talking about? I think most people have heard of this, but let's situate it for them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, conceptually, there's an important distinction to be drawn between, I think, a legitimate conspiracy that has enough evidence to go into popular record and public record as something that's just happened, like Brutus and Cassius, with Caesar or something like that, and a conspiracy theory. We were talking to, I think, Pat Coffin about the difference a little bit the other day, and it's an important thing. A conspiracy theory, I think, is a CIA-generated term. And it has built into it in incredulity subjectively and incredibility objectively. So, yeah, this definitely, as you and I were just saying before we rolled here, it's definitely much, much closer to a conspiracy theory. It's along with anything from, a kooky theory like Elvis is still alive and, was probed by aliens or whatever to the more plausible conspiracy theory accounts. My general distinction is on a preponderance of the evidence test, meaning 51% or more is preponderance of the evidence. I call it a conspiracy theory if it's anywhere under 51%, right? So there are elements of this I think we'll get into right away that are compelling. Right. There are elements of this that can't just be flat denied. There are other elements of it which are somewhat ridiculous, like the notion that JP1 was some sort of roundabout, super ultra conservative hero in the first place. That's never true. I've never found that to be the case. But so I put it somewhere in the order of it. Yeah. I don't believe it. It's not at the preponderance of the evidence. Meaning in practical judgment, Aristotle says prudence is basically made on a preponderance of the evidence basis. So going forward, I don't walk around talking when I first hear JP1 as if this is all absolutely real. I just say there's an interesting set of facts surrounding his death and the days preceding his death, which is to say his short papacy. Also 33 days is from the Gospels, an interesting concept, but I don't know. Number. How would you characterize it? This isn't one we've talked about a ton privately. So
yeah, you and I haven't talked a lot about it. I would give it a 50-50. I wouldn't give it a 51. I'm open to this being a murder. There's two hypotheses on this. One is John Paul I was this arch conservative, and he was going to bring back the Latin Mass, and he was going to reform the church and kick out the Freemasons, and he had this big agenda for reform after the horrors of the late 1960s, right? Yeah. And I'm going to go through some facts that show that that's probably not the case. He doesn't seem to be an arch conservative. He took the name John Paul, which is an innovation, two names, to show tribute to John the 23rd and Paul VI. So he's definitely in line with the reforms of John the 23rd and Paul VI. The other hypothesis is that the Vatican Bank had been so corrupted and had been undermined to the tune of $250 million of lost assets that he was going to clean up the Vatican Bank. Now, people know this story not because of reading church history. They know it from Godfather III. Godfather III has Michael Corleone basically trying to present himself as a noble, moral Catholic in his later days. And he comes to the rescue of the Vatican Bank towards the end of Paul VI's reign and offers to bail them out in exchange for some not so legit stuff from the Holy See. And in that film, John Paul I is poisoned and dies. and it relates to the Immobiliare deal that Michael Corleone is putting together. If you want to learn more, I guess watch Godfather 3. I don't think it's accurate or anything. It's drama. It's Hollywood. There's some sketchy stuff in that film. So I don't know. But that's where people, I think, generally are aware of the John Paul I controversy. People have said to me, what do you think about Godfather 3? Did that really happen? So when they're saying that, they're talking about, was John Paul I murdered? Was he poisoned in his bedroom based on the Vatican Bank bad deal that was going down in 77 into 1978. So people who assert that John Paul I was murdered, and I think it's kind of a 50-50 toss-up, they're coming from those two, I guess those are the motives. Either he was an arch-conservative, fixing everything back to how it was, or Vatican Bank, or both, I guess.
Right, and there are interesting surrounding facts, like the Vatican City as a polity hadn't they within a week or something changed the rules on papal autopsies? Is always one of these first things these people throw at you.
Right.
I've heard it was debunked, but then I heard that it was not. You'll hear it's debunked and it wasn't debunked. I've looked into it. The sketchy part about a lot of these JP1 conspiracy theory issues and items is they're very hard to verify one way or the other. So what we'll be doing is citing from a couple of the authors that have written, and it's kind of like, look, it's your barbecue, I'm just going to cite to you a lot today. That one, I think that's a key fact that, is very hard to verify. And, if true, it looks kind of fishy. It's circumstantial, which isn't always bad, but there are some more substantial facts I guess we can get our teeth around once particularly with the bank.
So I'm going to go through the life of Albino Luciani. That's John Paul I. And basically, I just want to introduce everybody. Who was John Paul I? I mean, this guy was Pope for 33 days. Most Catholics out there know zero about him, other than that he preceded John Paul II. And I think as we go through this, bio bullet point of John Paul I, Albino Luciani, you'll see that he's definitely in the spirit of John the 23rd and Paul VI. And I think as we move through this, it's going to debunk the idea, that he was going to take Archbishop Lefebvre by the hand and wave his crozier and bring everything back to 1955.
Right, make him CDF. Right.
Yeah, that's not Albino Luciani. Though early Luciani, well, I'll just go into the bio. So he was Pope for 33 days. I mentioned that. He was born in 1912 in Forno di Canale. And
first Pope born in the 20th century. I don't know where I came by that.
Good point. Yeah. So this is in northern Italy, like Venice area. He was the son of Giovanni Luciani, and his mother was Bortola Tancon. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He was baptized the day he was born. The midwife baptized him, it sounds like, because he might have been in danger of death. He's the oldest of 4 children. At the age of 10, so this is 1922, during Lent, he hears the sermons of a visiting Capuchin friar, and he's inspired to become a priest. He tells his dad, I want to become a priest. So that's the origin of his vocation to the priesthood. He tried to join the Jesuits, but he was denied. Thanks be to God.
That's not good. Yeah.
And he was ordained in 1935 at the age of 23, so pretty young priest. He wrote a doctoral thesis on the origin of the human soul according to Antonio Rosmini. Now, Rosmini is kind of a proto-modernist. His books were placed on the Index. He had some sketchy things. Pope Leo the 13th, Rosmini, by the way, is in the 1800s. And Pope Leo the 13th, big hero of mine, big hero of Tim's. We've talked a lot about the greatness of Pope Leo the 13th. And by the way, why isn't he canonized? Doesn't make any sense. In 1887, Leo the 13th condemned 40 propositions by Rosmini. So he's a proto-modernist. Leo the 13th didn't like him. Luciani writes a doctoral thesis against Rosmini. So here earlier in Luciani's John Paul I's life, he is in line with the anti-modernist movement. I think that's an important point to make.
I'm just curious. Doctoral dissertation at Bologna, was it? Is that right? It was outside of Rome.
No, I believe it's in Rome.
Was it?
I didn't write it down.
What school? Okay, me neither. I was just, never mind.
Okay. Yeah. 1958, he's appointed bishop of Vittorio Veneto by John the 23rd. Now, this is kind of interesting. In 67 to 69, he's involved in the schism. And it involves the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's called the Schism of Montaner. I don't know if I'm saying it right. The Schism of Montier. So, in this small town, I think it's less than 3,000 people, the pastor died. And so, Luciani, John Paul I, before he was Pope, he appointed a new pastor. The people there rejected the pastor, and they said, we want our vicar, the assistant priest, to be the pastor. And Bishop Luciani said, no way, I'm the bishop. I get to appoint who's going to be your pastor. And so the people locked up that priest in the attic, I think, of the rectory, basically wouldn't let him become their pastor. And they said, no, we want our old assistant pastor to be the pastor. And he said, no way. So Luciani comes to town with the police and removes the Blessed Sacrament from the church.
Wow.
Shuts it down. The people respond by starting a new church in town in line with the Eastern Orthodox Church, and they start celebrating the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom in the town. And it exists to this day, that Orthodox Church.
Wow.
So Luciani was not going to back down and give him the pastor they wanted. In fact, I think he gave him 3 pastors in a row, and they all got rejected until they became Eastern Orthodox.
Like, guys, what's your long-term plan? Unless you're going to kill this pastor, like, you're going to have to feed him up in the attic.
Exactly.
You're going to have to give him bathroom breaks. So, you didn't think this through, did you?
So
I
anyway,
never heard that.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of an interesting thing. It kind of shows that Luciani, he had some cojones, you know. He's
cojones?
He's like, I'm the bishop. I'm going to give you your pastor. So, interesting. Now,
what's your plan?
Yeah, in 1968, when he's bishop, he submits a report to his predecessor as the Patriarch of Venice, Giovanni Urbani, and argued that the contraceptive pill should be allowed to Catholics.
Right.
So everybody listen up. Luciani, who became John Paul I, presented a report asking for Catholics to use the birth control pill, which is a new invention. They didn't know much about it. But he says, hey, I think this is in line with Catholic teaching, moral teaching. As long as people aren't using, I think the argument was, condoms, but they're using this pill, it's okay. Right. This report was brought together and submitted to Paul VI. Paul VI responds that year with a statement, which is called Humanae Vitae. So this puts John Paul I in context with Paul VI regarding birth control. And Humanae Vitae was really a response to this report that has its origin with Luciani in 1968. Which
I knew, I found this in past research, he had a pretty thoroughgoingly anti-church position on artificial contraception. Like, it was, maybe at the time he
Luciani.
said Luciani, proto JP1. So he, later in his life, he kind of refused to acknowledge Humanae Vitae, refused to talk on it. So he is not, people have to understand, again, those of us, traditionalists and traditionalist sympathizers in the church who want a spiritual father so desperately, like orphans that we are.
Yes.
We want a spiritual father so desperately. So,
like an orphan running up to some man on the street. Are you my daddy?
Are you my daddy?
Yeah.
And then the next man that passes in a trench coat that looks halfway presentable. Are you my daddy? This is us. This is what we were talking about this with Coven the other day. Like, Benedict said it's the age of absconding fathers, and he's absolutely right. So we're trying to make this guy kind of fits the bill, right? He got killed. And he got killed under he died under some suspicious circumstances. Let's craft the facts around the narrative instead of the other way around. Right. And I think that's kind of what's happened with him, because he was not this hyper conservative. I mean, just picture this, like Paul VI, who's not a conservative, never taken to be a conservative, had the good sense to have Cardinal Odie, Thomistic Dominican Cardinal Odie, write part 2 of Humanae Vitae, right? And that's why it's so solid, is because Odie, who's also a sort of Fatima conspiracy guy that I like and trust very much, partly for his theology, he had the good sense to do that. And that's Paul VI, who's, out here in left field. Meanwhile, people are saying JP1, he's some hyper, conservative guy, and he's opposing what Paul VI is doing there and never accepts it. So that you got to put these, I know it's complex, you got to put these facts into proper constellation. It's staggering how few popes get everything or nearly everything right. This is why we love Leo the 13th. He's one of the few that just everything he writes on, he hits out of the park.
Yeah.
JP1 is not one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said, people with conviction, John Paul I, he was going to bring back the Latin Mass and roll back Vatican II. No, he wasn't. His name is John Paul, which is in honor of John the 23rd, Paul VI. He's totally in line with them. So
they respond that he said these are the two. One of them made him a bishop and one made him an archbishop, right? I think that's why he says, they're my spiritual fathers. John the 23rd made me a bishop. Paul VI made me an archbishop or a cardinal, I forget. So that's what they respond. But no, he is more in line with their program, you're saying.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of obvious, Now, it's true, when Humanae Vitae came out, Luciani recognized it. But for the rest of his, as far as I could tell, for the rest of his episcopate up until Pope, he was radio silent on it. In fact, he was asked to come and give a 10-year anniversary keynote on it, and he didn't do it. He didn't even show up for it.
Right.
It seems that he was, it's kind of like, I guess, Jerome on the deuterocanonical books. He's not a big fan of them, but the Pope said these are in. And so he's like, they're in, they're translated, they're there. Right?
Yeah.
Protestants love to bring that up, but it's like, hey, Jerome's a churchman. He put them in. So I think that's kind of, Luciani is deferring and saying, well, it's in a papal document, but he's not enthusiastic about promoting Humanae Vitae, it seems.
Right.
So in 1969, he becomes the Patriarch Archbishop of Venice by Paul VI, and he's named cardinal in 1973. And he did clash with priests who supported the liberalization of divorce in Italy. So there's secular laws coming through about making divorce more lax. He did suspend those priests, so that's good. And then he is elected Pope in 1978. He's called the September Pope, 33 days. And we do know, as you mentioned before, Tim, that the Vatican Bank is rocked at this time.
Yeah.
It was $250 million. Is that right? That's what you got?
$250 million. Somehow the claim was over $3 billion, but the Vatican Bank ended up losing $250 million. So, work that out. And then when we get into the bank stuff,
this is $250 million in 1977 dollars.
Right.
I'd even done the math what that is in 2018 dollars. Yeah,
pre-stagflation, inflation, whatever it is, like that. That's a pretty penny even then. Most of this information on the bank comes from David Yollop's 1984 book, In God's Name. He, again, the interesting thing, well, to me, the most interesting facet of his claims, and there are several interesting ones, is the role played by the P2 Carbonari Lodge of the illegalized Italian high-ranking Masons, who were the same house or same publishing font of the Alta Vendita, which we've talked about before.
Which video did we talk about Alta Vendita in?
First Fatima one, not Fatima Secret 1, Secret 2, or Secret 3, but the very first Fatima we did.
Yeah, if y'all want to watch that one on Alta Vendita that Tim did, it's called Third Secret of Fatima and the Smoke of Satan.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, but it's not Fatima Secret 3 when we did the sequence. Yes. It was the first one we did.
Right.
Yeah. So that's grabby that the two guys that were actually according to Yollop, and I think this is relatively unlike many of the other facts, it's easy to corroborate the other facts in Yollop's book. They were actually being they went to trial for this and ended up dying mafioso-like deaths. These two operators in the case, I guess Godfather III picks up on it some. But, so the Pope had been in potential danger because of the corruption in the Vatican Bank is the basic liner note. It's the Banco Ambrosiano, same one we've talked about before. You did a video that was like almost 500,000 views or something at this point on why did Benedict resign. It's that bank.
Yeah, I'll put that in the right corner. This is why did Pope Benedict XVI resign as it relates to the Vatican Bank. And Archbishop Vigano's all over that story. He's not just in the McCarrick story.
Right.
Archbishop Vigano's at ground zero in the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI and the Vatican Bank scandal in the 2010, 11, 12, 13 scandal. There's actually two major scandals. There's the late 70s Vatican Bank scandal, which we're talking about today, John Paul I, where we have a sketchy death. And then there's the Vatican Bank scandal of 2010, 11, 12, where we have a sketchy papal resignation. Both of them Vatican Bank front and center. And I do believe 100% in both of those events and their relationship to subsequent church history as we're living it right now.
Me too. Well, here's why. Because when it's a sovereign state, the Vatican City, and they don't have the same, I don't want to say regulatory structures in place, sound like FDR, for heaven's sakes, that heaven forfend. But I mean, when there aren't the same, there's not the same transparency in Vatican City and their, I guess, quasi-equivalent of like the Federal Reserve Bank, Banco Ambrosiano, that we're used to, that we're accustomed to, transparency or something like it, at least translucency. There's nothing like it there. So they never straightened this out from the 60s, 70s, right? I mean, this is the stuff of the less wacky part of the conspiracy theory is like, hey, there's this ostensible thing that's happening in the late 70s and it's coming out in 1982, right? The corruption was real. Even mainstream sources verify this much. And it never got straightened out in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So, yeah, it's the same source of trouble. The bank's head was Bishop Paul Marcinkus. He worked with a secular man named Roberto Calvi of Banco Ambrosiano. He was another high-ranking P2 officer, Alta Vendita Lodge.
Freemason.
Marcinkus, at the time was head of the Vatican Bank, was indicted in 82 as an accessory in the $3.5 billion collapse of Banco Ambrosiano. The bank itself lost only $250 million only, right?
Right.
So Calvi, the mafioso operator inside man, was the member of P2 and was later found dead in London in 1982 after disappearing just before, like the week before the corruption became public. So this seems to be real stuff.
Yeah, people are dying in relation to this scandal.
Which is a lot of money, whose subject is much, much money. So this is not wacky stuff. David Yollop, when he published this book in 1984, he had his claims had the ring of truth. He's saying, look, I'll donate every penny I make to a charity of the Vatican's choice if you agree to investigate this claim. That always, if you mean such a deal, then that lends you a bit of credibility. His central thesis is this, that when the body of JP1 was found, and there is some controversy over in what condition his body was found in regard to this Banco Ambrosiano scandal, they say initially his contorted hand gripped a piece of paper that was later destroyed because it named high-ranking members of the Curia who were Freemasons and had money laundering and other numerous scandal roles, probably with members of the P2 Carbonari, the high Italian Freemasons. So yeah, and Marcinkus is central to the facts, the constellation of facts, and a couple other bishops, and then there are like these three operators inside the P2 that were like mafia types. Do with that what it's right. A messy constellation of facts, but it's interesting, and there seems to be something there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well,
I don't know.
It's interesting that Godfather III, not that I'm citing it as history, please don't read me that way. But
yeah.
You mentioned the mafioso types who are working with these cardinals trying to bail out, cover up this loss of money. And by the way, we're not saying that. Oh, while you're talking, Tim, I put it into an inflation calculator. So 250 million in 1977 is almost 1.1 billion today's dollars. So we're talking about $1 billion.
Yeah.
And by the way, this isn't the money was lost. Like, oh, we invested in some penny stocks and it's gone. This means the money was stolen, people.
Right.
When mafioso types are in there, these are getting funneled through accounting accounts, money laundering, etc. Somebody stole $1 billion.
Right.
Transferred it out of the Vatican Bank. It's gone. Did I say $1 trillion? I meant $1 billion.
No,
$1 billion. Yeah. Okay. $1 billion in today's dollars, 250 million back then. That means the church had that much money in the books, which is interesting. And it went somewhere. And people are dying for it. And in The Godfather 3, they make Michael Corleone. Michael Corleone from Godfather 1 with the busted up face, Yeah.
Of course.
He is one of the mafioso types involved in it, trying to bail him out and help him. But of course, he wants to get his mafia deal out of it.
Right.
And another interesting element here, I think you've mentioned the name, but you haven't gone into it, is Jean-Marie Vallot. Jean-Marie Vallot is a name you got to know. He was the cardinal secretary of Vatican City under Paul VI. And it's alleged by many, including Malachy Martin, that it was Jean-Marie Vallot who was working with these other cardinals and the mafia who had him murdered, John Paul I murdered. There are lots of testimonies that Jean-Marie Vallot, who was a French cardinal, Secretary of State, that he was a Freemason from France.
Right.
And I tend to believe that. I've seen a lot of evidence on that. Again, can't be sure because A, you can't trust the Freemasons if they say so-and-so was a Freemason. And B, if you are a Freemason, it's a secret society. They're not going to tell you anyway. Personally, they're not going to announce it.
And C, sorry to jump in.
Yeah, go.
Because the sites that claim more certainty than reasonable speculation, which is what we're doing, overstep their boundaries because of A and B.
Sure.
Does everyone out there understand?
Yeah.
Some of these issues, you just can't walk between the raindrops and get more than a kind of reasoned speculativity or whatever.
That's right.
I mean, you can't go further than we're going because the only sites that are like, oh yeah, Novus Ordo Watch or whatever, they're like, no, this is certain. How? You don't know. You're not a member of the P2, obviously.
Yeah.
And you're not one of 5 or 10 privileged Vatican operators that actually probably are alive that know what actually happened. So how do you get further than we're getting? Anyway,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, all you can do is collect a constellation of facts and see if it tips you over 51%. And I think neither of us are willing to do that. Incidentally, on Jean-Marie Vallot, if for all of our Malachy Martin readers out there, Windswept House, great novel. In that book, there's a character named Cardinal Jean-Claude de Vincennes. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Malachy Martin, that's his presentation of Jean-Marie Vallot. So and by the way, you can go to a website online and put in Windswept House, who the characters represent.
Yeah.
And there's a log, and it tells you everybody in Windswept House who they are in history, because Malachy Martin called it faction. It's facts with fiction. That might be contested. We understand. I don't think Tim and I trust everything Malachy Martin says. But for those of you that read Windswept House and you want to make that connection, Jean-Marie Vallot is Jean-Claude de Vincennes, who's a cardinal, a corrupt guy in the book.
Wasn't Malachy Martin, Dr. Marshall, wasn't he one of the popularizers of the idea that JP1 was killed because he was a conservative? Like, so I thought he's one of the main. I might be wrong.
I've listened to, I think, 2 interviews with Malachy Martin where he asserts unequivocally that John Paul I was poisoned. Malachy Martin, when he talks about it, he repeats it over and over as a 100% certainty.
To Art Bell, those
I think it's the Art Bell interviews that John Paul I was poisoned. He was murdered. I don't recall Malachy Martin saying it was because John Paul I was an arch conservative.
Okay, yeah, maybe.
I'm not sure that Malachy Martin follows that train of thought that John Paul I was going to be the super reformer post Vatican II. Maybe I'm wrong. You should go listen to the Art Bell 1984 Malachy Martin interviews. It's good stuff, whether it's faction or what. You know what I was thinking, Tim? I was wondering if we took some of the juicy parts from that Art Bell interview and we ran them on our show and we did a commentary on it.
That'd be pretty dope.
I think it'd be cool. Yeah. In the comments, y'all want to see that? Let us know. So that's, Jean-Marie.
Well, the Villot theory, it's that it was his hand that actually poisoned the cup. That's the theory I've always heard. That's what everyone goes with. I didn't know that he might have been, sort of depicted fictionally in Godfather III. This is all new to me. I'd always heard stop at Godfather II. So, but Villot is, according to Malachy Martin and others, and all these theories, he's the one that actually had the closest access because of his station to JP1, and he's the one that actually poisoned the cup.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's another theory that came out last year, which doesn't have Jean-Marie Villot poisoning the cup. This is in the 2017 book, The Godmother, not to be confused with Godfather III, right?
Yeah.
But the book is called The Godmother, Madre.
Not to be confused with any of the cardinals that were implicated over this past summer, right? Uncle Ted, Aunt Ted.
Well, no, what I'm about to say relates to Uncle Ted McCarrick. Check this out.
All right.
Check this out. So 2017 Godmother Madre Pascalina, she says, or in that book it says, Father Charles Murr notes the coincidence that John Paul I had attempted to discipline Cardinal Sebastiano Biagio.
All right.
I think we mentioned this before we started rolling today.
Yeah,
Cardinal Biagio was a super liberal modernist bishop and was involved in getting Theodore McCarrick ordained a bishop in 1977. Remember this, folks, in May of 1977, McCarrick was created a bishop, and he already had a reputation. Remember, the allegation of his sexual abuse in New York City goes back to, is it 70 or 71?
One of those. Yeah. Early. He was young.
Yeah. So he's already a child molester. And, by the way, this all happens under Cardinal Spellman of New York. Cardinal Spellman is a notorious homosexual.
Wicked dude.
A liberal. Guess who his nemesis was? I think we should do a video on this too, Tim. Who is Cardinal Spellman's nemesis? A guy named Fulton Sheen.
Yep. Yeah, they hated each other. Fulton
Sheen and Cardinal Spellman, who was a notorious homosexual and a liberal, were opposed and locked horns often. And by the way, this is not spoken about widely, but I think there's something to it. One of the reasons why Cardinal Dolan has Fulton Sheen's body locked down in New York City, yes, absolutely. I think the Spellman proteges of New York City, all those monsignors and priests, they don't want Fulton Sheen canonized. He's the nemesis of their boy, Cardinal Spellman. And as long as Fulton Sheen's body is locked in the basement of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, Fulton Sheen isn't going to get canonized.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's, why wouldn't Cardinal Dolan just release the body of Fulton Sheen? Doesn't make any sense. Just release it so he can be canonized. What's it matter? This is why it matters. Because Fulton,
wait a minute.
And also remember Bella Dodd and Fulton Sheen? And she said, how many cardinals did she have? 4. 4 cardinals. You can do the math of who was cardinals at that time and figure out who those were. And I'm pretty sure Spellman was one of them. Based on his theology, based on his economics, based on his sexual behavior.
Right, that's right.
The
They're
American,
Americans. They're Americans.
yeah, the American government has records of Spellman bringing homosexual actors from Broadway to the rectory of Cardinal Spellman.
Really?
Either the government, our government made it up, or it happened. And I don't always trust our government, but Spellman's a bad dude.
I want to go back to something really, really basic just for 20 seconds. I think a lot of people out there scratch their heads when they hear about these rivalries, inter-cardinalate or intra-episcopal or intra-cardinalate rivalries.
Like bishops against bishops, that kind of stuff?
Bishops against bishop, or even Fulton Sheen, but he's so good. He's almost a saint. Yeah. What do you mean he has enemies? Good guys have enemies.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the sort of neutered Church of Nice, people get used to being told that you don't have enemies. Jesus talked about enemies all the time. He said,
love your enemies presumes you have enemies.
Love your enemies presumes you have them. But if you stand for something, you're going to have enemies. The kind of she-males running around, their main goal in life, ostensibly, as far as I can tell, is to never get any enemies so you don't take any stands. But yes, Cardinal, who are we just talking about? Spellman, yeah. Cardinal Spellman and Archbishop Fulton Sheen were mortal rivals, and this is
mortal combat.
It makes sense. Yeah, fatality. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Well, we're in the realm of JP1, so maybe that's a fatality. Scorpion.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, it's an important thing to point out that people, just as we go along, there are these rivalries. It's what you want to see the good guys have. Well, I don't like when I look at the U.S. Senate and I see that they're going to lunch with each other, a conservative and a arch liberal. It's like, you guys the whole system is designed based on you representing your ideology. That's healthy. That's good. I don't want you guys all buddies. I don't like when I turn on the OKC Thunder and I see them slapping high fives with the other teams, right? The good guys and the bad guys are supposed to oppose each other. That's the way the whole thing's set up. So, yeah, so the bitter rivals and well done by Archbishop Fulton Sheen for opposing the agenda with every breath of a wicked prelate like Cardinal Spellman.
And it shows some restraint on the part of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, because Bella Dodd knew who all these corrupt priests, bishops, and cardinals were, but it was Fulton Sheen who, as her director, told her, do not reveal the names. So Fulton Sheen could have easily destroyed Spellman if Spellman was on the list, and I think he was, by saying, yeah, Bella Dodd, go on CBS and read the names, because then there'd be egg all over the face of Spellman and others.
But I don't get why not. I'm always go full bore. But yeah, he was a restrained guy. He's known for his restraint.
Right.
And it wasn't from a compromising sort of character. It was true, the virtue of being, restrained. But I kind of wish he wasn't in that case.
Yeah, right. Well,
either way, yeah.
If we go back to this book, so the Godmother, right? Madre Pascalina. So she says that it was Biagio who was the last human person to have seen John Paul I alive. And so this suggests that it was Biagio, Cardinal Biagio, who poisoned the cup. The tea. Allegedly it's tea. Right?
Yeah,
evening
I've always heard tea.
So that poison was added to the tea of John Paul I before bedtime, and that it was Biagio who poisoned the cup. But the really interesting part about this, what I want people to take home, is Biagio and is related to the Spellman McCarrick situation.
Yes, that's important.
All right. So
you can't overlook it.
Yeah. And it's also it's interesting that McCarrick is also related to financial problems, as we're seeing with the Papal Foundation, millions of dollars as well. He was the founder of the Papal Foundation, ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. So we have sexual immorality, and we have sketchiness with funds, bank accounts.
Right now, there are multiple accounts of the actual minutes and let's say hour of JP1's death, as everyone out there might imagine. We know that he was reportedly reading Thomas Kempis's Imitation of Christ. He was in the middle of that book. He took it to bed. It was about 10 p.m. That the Pope he was about to retire to bed. Allegedly, he had learned that some neo-fascists had fired upon a bunch of communists in the streets outside of one of the party's offices in Rome. One was killed, and the Pope lamented to John Magee, who is, according to other stories, John Magee is, I think, a biographer. He's the last person to have talked to him alive. So you have lots of contradiction here, which is natural. But he said even the young are killing each other these days, or something like that. And he was upset by this or whatever, then retired to his room to read more Thomas Kempis' Imitation of Christ, and whatever happened then happened. So there are lots of different accounts, and all of these people seem somewhat credible. Yeah, many of them seem, somewhat credible, and in other ways less credible at the time. What do you do with that much contradiction?
Yeah.
That's where I spin my wheels. The other things that we presented with Fatima or Akita, it's like there's a coherent story, there's a coherent narrative, even if some people try to malign us as Fatimists or whatever. No, there's a real story that emerges here. With something like this is why you just can't get there. I can't get there because there's so much contradiction.
And I think that's your point for this show, is that really I'm setting out to do this show because I want to debunk and refute the often repeated hypothesis that John Paul the First, was the supposed great reformer. Who's gonna go on hard with Humanae Vitae. It seems like he wasn't going to do that. He was going to roll back Vatican II. No, he wasn't going to do that. He's going to bring back the Latin Mass. No, he wasn't going to do that. I mean, he's the first pope ever who was inaugurated and not crowned. I guess you could go back to the patristic era. But, he did not put on the papal tiara. He took two names. So he was definitely on the opening up of the church and a modernizing of the church. So some people have said, well, he's the bishop in white who was killed, because if he was murdered, it may not be bullets and arrows like we see in Fatima 3A. It was just a cup of tea. Well, yeah, I don't think so. So I think what we've done is we've debunked that it's like this really weird trad theory that JP1 was our daddy and he was going to come back, he was going to fix everything. I don't think so.
And many of those, as we were talking about, many of those theories we're on board for. I mean, we're pretty much, with. You have to be, what you call the trad theory. It's like, yeah, I mean, a lot of those are.
And I shouldn't call it the trad theory. I should call it a
conspiracy theory with which we don't agree.
Yes,
I mean,
okay, yeah, right.
It's super sticky, people. Yeah. That's what people have to understand. You can't just be one of these goons out there saying, oh, the Fatimists, there's nothing to that. The third secret's fully revealed. It's not. It's demonstrably not, even by the things I go back to with Sochi.
On that, we feel confident.
Yeah, I'm 100% basically based on the Vatican contradicted itself on that in major fundamental ways. Yeah. We talked about that.
Yeah, see our 3-part series on that.
Right. So you can't just be all one way or all the other. But then what you were accidentally like, oops, I shouldn't have called it a trad theory. It's a conspiracy theory that probably doesn't rise to the level of credibility or whatever that many traditionalists follow. It's like, yeah, this is interesting, but it's not at the same level of establishment by fact. And that's ultimately people where our loyalties have to lie. Remember, like Aristotle talking about at the beginning of the Ethics, he's like, I have loyalty to my friend, the author of the Forms. He's talking about old Plato, and I love my friend, but I love the truth more. It must be counted dearer to me, right? That's all it would be kind of neat in a way. It would be tidy in a sense. If JP1 was this arch conservative, he demonstrably was going to bring back undo all of the reforms made semi-recently for him, within a decade and a half. And that would be kind of dope. I mean, it would be cool. I can get there, but you have to let the facts shape the narrative. You can't let the narrative shape the facts.
Yes.
Right. Which is what some people start accusing us of doing with Fatima. It's like, no, You have to distinguish, and then when you're sick of distinguishing, distinguish some more.
That's right.
And that's what we're really doing now. One quick thing. I know what your response will be to this, and it'll be appropriate, but Dr. Marshall. But it is interesting that Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, who has played this, I think, nefarious role in Fatima, centrally nefarious role in Fatima and the 2000 revelation of Secret 3A, he reports in writing that there was this meeting between Sister Lucy in 1977, and Albino,
Luciani,
JP2, Luciani, and that he emerged from his meeting with Sister Lucy to, I guess, some sort of foyer where Cardinal Bertone was waiting, and he looked white, he looked ashen white, he looked upset, and that he reported that she'd told him he would be Pope at the next conclave in like a year, and it would be a very short papacy, meaning you're going to die, boy. So that's Bertone, who, I don't believe him when it comes to Fatima, but as a sort of opponent of the reform, this would be something more like an admission by a party opponent, which would seem to be more, if JP1 had been a conservative, this would make it more believable that it came out of one of the sort of opponents of the conservatives' mouth, like Bertone. So there's a response to this. I forget what is it. You've looked into this.
I had read, and it's been a while, but allegedly Sister Lucia was asked about this. Did you prophesy that John Paul I would become Pope? And she says, I'm not something like this. I'm paraphrasing, something like, I'm not sure. I think I told the sisters in the convent he will one day make a great Pope, or he would be a good Pope. So she's, from what I read, and I don't know what the sources is, she sort of distanced herself. Either she's doing it out of humility. She just wants to say, I prophesied the Pope. Got it. Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it.
Nailed it. Or she was saying, maybe I was misunderstood. Like she said, you'd be a great Pope. That doesn't necessarily mean you will be. So anyway, I don't trust Bertone, Cardinal Bertone.
Either.
Anything he says, I'm like, not so sure about that. I don't know if there's any other source besides Cardinal Bertone on that. I just know that Lucia herself downplayed it.
But two things, two responses to the response, like replies to the objection. Use the Thomistic language.
Odd one.
Yeah, odd one. So that's not really a contradiction by Sister Lucy. She's just like, yeah, I remember that meeting with him. I said that his shoes were awesome. It's like, okay, that's not a contradiction.
Yeah, so she remembers having said something about JP1
as Pope.
Something papal about Luciani. So that is noteworthy.
And that is prescient. I mean, that involves her capacity for apparitional prescience, right? She's making a prediction in 1977 about the conclave in 1978. So that's almost closer to an affirmation than a contradiction.
Right.
That's all I'd point out. And two, now this one's really near and dear to me because you said, I don't trust anything Bertone said. Well, me neither. I don't trust the guy further than I can throw him. But remember, there's this legal standard I was adverting to a lot in the Fatima videos because the legal standards are really helpful. It's an admission by a party opponent. Sure. Bertone is basically an opponent of, I think the veritable message of Fatima, which is the veritable message of the church. If I've understood all these things correctly, and you have as well, I think repentance, maybe corruption in the church, maybe other things. We won't go there, but except apostasy in the church, we need to, as the laity, call them to order and straighten things out. Bertone is an opponent of all that. But if anything, the fact that he admitted that this meeting took place, or he's the scribe, as per this account, between Albini and is it Albino? Albini Luciano.
Albino Luciani.
Is he like all white with pink eyes? Is he an albino?
His name is
the kid albino.
In English we would say albino, but in Italy pink albino. Albino Luciani.
Pink-eyed JP1.
Yeah.
Well, so he's the scribe of this meeting, And if anything, it sort of cuts against. I mean, it adds fuel to the fire. That's all I'm saying. Of the whole Fatima, late 70s, late 60s, late 70s thing.
Yeah, because now we have perhaps the prophecy of John Paul I becoming Pope wrapped into Sister Lucia and the Fatima thing.
And the bishop in white. Like maybe this
can't be the Bishop of White, Tim. There's no way.
Well, I'm not saying I think it is. I'm just saying this is why I'm pushing back a little bit. Because I don't think he is.
You can see how people looking at these. They're like, oh, we could connect that. We could connect that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so John Paul I's Bishop in White, he got killed. In 3A, the Pope got killed. And just trying to make sense of it. I mean, Bertoni saying that John Paul II getting shot in St. Peter's Square has some sort of fulfillment of 3A of a Pope being shot and killed, but he didn't die. We've gone through all that in previous videos.
Right.
So we won't bore people. If you want to learn more about that, go to the older Fatima videos we did, what was it, a month ago? Yeah. So I think we can take home from all of this that, again, I say it's a 50-50 that JP1 was murdered. The motive was not anything having to do with Vatican II or doctrine. If it happened, it was Vatican Bank Scandal. That's it.
Yeah.
That's my elevator pitch on it. If
that was pithy.
If someone grabs me with a cup of coffee after Mass one day and asks me about it, that's what I would say.
I'm pretty close to you on this, but I think I'm a little less than 50-50 on it.
In which direction? In which direction?
Toward maybe not, maybe 30-70 that he was killed.
So 30 that he was killed, 70 he wasn't killed. That's your take?
Right.
Okay.
30 to 35, 65.
I wish we had cool graphics that were like on the screen showing our.
I know, but we're like, it wouldn't even be worth the time of the graph because I'm like changing. I'm like, maybe 40, maybe 40.
It could be real time, just moving. Yeah.
Yeah. The pie chart is growing and shrinking, but see, I'm more inclined toward what physicists call a grand unifying theorem. That I'm more inclined than you are toward a grand unifying theorem. If he actually was killed, like you said in your 500,000 viewed Benedict, why did he retire video, if there was some Banco Ambrosiano thing that did involve the P2, the Freemasons, then all of a sudden I think that wraps with it more of the traditionalist claims about maybe you really did have this letter that this 1984 book swears he did in his hand that was a bunch of Freemasons. Once you get the Freemasons in there, it was a list of Freemasons, and it was 110 Freemasons. We didn't talk about this. Maybe we should talk about it at the end. The speculation.
Let's talk about it now. Yeah.
From various sources is that it was a list of like 110 or 120 Freemasons, probably all P2 Carbonari Lodge, highest lodge in Italy, that had infiltrated the Vatican, and that he was going to out. So this does bring him more toward. This brings more of the facts from the wayward constellation toward a center. I'm more inclined to believe if he was killed, the Banco Ambrosiano stuff probably, okay, why do you need $1 billion? Right. How many male hookers does this buy?
Yeah, right.
I think the financial corruption, particularly when it's P2, the Freemasons that have their hand in it probably point to all the other stuff. So I'm less than 50-50, but the list is interesting. And supposedly Villot was at the top of that list.
Exactly. And he was Secretary of State.
Which is huge. Right.
He's the most powerful cardinal on earth. Right. You know what's interesting about this whole thing is we have a parallel structure that's emerged both with Benedict XVI and John Paul I. And maybe we can just close with this to get people thinking. Let's get the gears moving. So with Benedict XVI, and I would encourage everybody to go see my video, Why Did Pope Benedict XVI Resign the Vatican Bank?
It's a good one.
Benedict XVI, there's a Vatican Bank scandal. He brings in this unknown guy, Archbishop Vigano, to go in. Within a year, Vigano finds all this hidden money and exposes it. All the cardinals hate Vigano. Benedict XVI takes Vigano, puts him in America, as the nuncio and says, hey, go check out things over in D.C., or he busts basically McCarrick, right? Meanwhile, Benedict XVI receives a binder with a red binder full of names of corrupt priests, both in financial and in sexual immorality. Benedict XVI receives this red binder. He decides to resign. A few months later, he's resigned. There's also the shutting down of the ATM machines in Vatican City. Just go see that whole video. Let's now look at John Paul I.
Right.
We have a list. It's not a red binder. We have a list of Vatican officials who are associated with the Freemasons. We have a Vatican Bank scandal of $250 million in 1977 dollars, $1 billion in today's money, right? But we don't have a papal resignation. We have a papal death. I'm just saying this stuff is sketchy, man. You get immorality, you get lists of clergy, you get Vatican Bank scandals, and we have one pope's dead, another pope resigned. And I'm a little cynical. I don't think it's not just doctrine. It's not just dogma. I guess I'm too much of a cynic where I say follow the money. Don't follow the doctrine. It's too muddy. If you want to know what's really going on in Vatican City and the corruption, follow the money, and you'll find out what's up.
Yeah, there's also the uncontroverted fact of this operator, P2 operator Calvi, who is unequivocally P2. He was found to be P2 in 1982 when this was coming out. It was like the day or 2 days before it all broke. He was found murdered, right? And later we found out that he was a Freemason. We found out that he was basically running things with the bank. He had this well-established relationship with Bishop Marcinkus, who was the Vatican insider with regard to Banco Ambrosiano. That's not like wacky tinfoil hat stuff. That's all on the public record, just like the Vatican Bank stuff would be on the public record with Benedict, right? It's the nice thing about fiscal trails, financial money paths, is that they lead the hardest evidence, right? They leave a paper trail.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're not juicy in the same sense that we don't know what all that stolen Freemasonic money or collusive money was ultimately what it ended up chasing in terms of which objects did it purchase and buy. But we do know that there's this amount missing. It was this villain, and the villains in both cases, the 1982 case and the 2012 case, was P2 Freemason involved. And it's a large chunk of money. Heads will roll, like you kept saying in your video on the other thing. So that, and I think the rest of the conspiracy, if you plug in a couple gaps, then I'm still only 35% on this. But I think the rest of it insinuates itself.
Yeah.
Because you don't just steal money and then go, give it to a bunch of orphans or whatnot. You steal money and you go do bad things.
Yep.
It's a tricky one.
It is.
It's a tricky one.
It is. So there's a lot there, but I think the conclusion is pretty clear. I hope people agree with us. If you don't agree with us, leave us a comment. We'll engage you there and talk about it. If there's something we missed, let us know about it. We can always revisit it. If you like these videos, please hit the like button. That tells YouTube that this is a cool video, and it'll show it to other people. And please subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell button, and you'll be notified every time there's a new video out. Anything else you want to add, Tim?
No. Just be holy, be well educated as you can on these things, and don't claim to be better educated than you are, because you can't get.
That's right.
You can't get past a certain point.
There are limits. There's absolutely limits. So yes, pray the rosary every day, live the message of Fatima, read the Bible every day, read Scripture, get close to our Lord, never lose hope, stay in the Catholic Church, stay in the boat, and on the screen you'll see more videos we've done. Click on one of those. Click on one of the playlists. And enjoy. God bless everyone. Out.